The shuttle docked with a shudder that vibrated through the floor plates and straight into the teeth of every passenger on board. Jonah Rios unbuckled his harness, grabbed his battered heavy-duty kit bag, and took a breath that tasted of recycled air and ozone. He had spent the last 3 weeks on a transport freighter that smelled exclusively of engine grease and freeze-dried protein paste, so the metallic tang of Vera's docking bay was a welcome improvement. He stepped out of the airlock and into the sensory overload that was the Veran Ring City. It was not merely a space station, it was a jewel hanging in the void, a rotating halo of glass and silver spinning slowly enough to generate 0.9 Earth gravity, which made Jonah feel just slightly lighter than usual, as if his boots were made of foam. The atrium before him was a cathedral of transparent aluminum, vaulting 500 feet high. Through the floor-to-ceiling viewports, the galaxy was a smear of diamond dust against the dark. But the real spectacle was inside. Glass walkways crisscrossed the empty air like spiderwebs, connecting the towering spires of the diplomatic quarter. Security drones, sleek and spherical like floating chrome eyes, drifted silently on magnetic currents, their scanners sweeping the crowd with soft blue lasers. And everywhere, there were flags, thousands of them. They hung from the vaulted ceiling in the microgravity zones, rippling in the artificial airflow like a sea of vibrant kelp. Jonah adjusted the strap on his shoulder. He was not here for the view. He was here for the plumbing. Well, the digital equivalent of plumbing. As a senior systems engineer for the Earth Coalition, his job was to ensure the shared communications lattice, the complex network that would translate, broadcast, and secure the upcoming diplomatic summit, did not crash and burn. It was high stakes, high pressure, and absolutely zero glamour. While the ambassadors would be dining on exotic synthesized meats and debating the finer points of Star Lane taxation, Jonah would be in a crawl space 3 levels down, arguing with a router that thought it was a toaster. He moved toward the immigration checkpoint, his eyes scanning the crowd. He saw species he recognized and a dozen he did not. A group of methane breathers moved inside sealed enviro suits that looked like walking aquariums. A tall insectoid diplomat was arguing with a vending machine. Jonah was distracted by a series of flashing amber and violet lights to his left. He paused. In his briefing packet, which he had read twice during the long flight, he had memorized the greeting protocols for the Veran nobility. Amber followed by violet in a pulsing rhythm indicated a high steward of the Outer Rim. To ignore such a dignitary was a diplomatic insult that could dock his pay for 6 months. Jonah stopped, turned toward the lights, and executed a perfect formal bow, bending at the waist with his hands flat against his thighs. He held the pose for a respectful 3 seconds. When he straightened up, he realized 2 things. First, the lights were coming from a cylindrical unit hovering 6 inches off the floor. Second, the unit was currently extending a suction hose and scrubbing a coffee stain off the polished tile. It was a cleaning bot. Jonah stood frozen, his face heating up. The bot beeped a mournful, dissonant tone and spun away to find more dirt. A shadow fell over him. Jonah looked up to see a Veran security officer looming. The Verans were humanoid but elongated, with pale, marble-smooth skin and eyes that were solid pools of black. This one was tapping a datapad with a long, 6-fingered hand. "Citizen," the officer said, the voice synthesized through a translator collar. "Security scan indicates a 94% probability of mockery. Are you attempting to insult the sanitation infrastructure of Vera?" "No," Jonah said quickly, holding up his hands. "No mockery intended. I mistook the status LEDs for a ducal greeting pattern. It has been a long flight." The officer stared at him. The black eyes did not blink. Inefficiency is also a crime in some sectors, the officer said. Move along. Earth human. Jonah moved along. He walked faster than necessary until he reached the turbo lift, jamming his thumb against the call button. So far, his diplomatic career was off to a stellar start. He had bowed to a vacuum cleaner and been threatened for inefficiency. The venue for the summit was the Grand Hall of Convergence, a space so large it possessed its own weather system. Wisps of cloud formed near the ceiling where the thermal regulators vented heat. The floor was a mosaic of obsidian and gold, and in the center stood the great table, a ring-shaped desk large enough to seat 300 delegates. Jonah spent the first 4 hours of his shift underneath that table. The communications lattice was a mess. The Varen hardware was centuries ahead of Earth tech, but it was temperamental. It relied on crystal resonance rather than standard circuitry, and trying to get it to interface with the Solari delegation's bioorganic transmitters was like trying to teach a cat to solve calculus problems. He was wrist-deep in a junction box, splicing a fiber optic cable, when the room suddenly went quiet. It was the kind of silence that had weight. The low hum of conversation cut off instantly. Even the air circulation fans seemed to dampen their noise. Jonah pulled his head out of the junction box and peered over the edge of the table. The rehearsal was beginning. The Varen delegation had arrived, led by Minister Kale Sorn. Sorn was a striking figure, tall even for a Varen, wearing robes of shifting gray silk that seemed to absorb the light around him. He moved with the fluid, predatory grace of a creature that had no natural enemies. But the silence was not for him. Entering from the opposite archway was the Solari delegation. Jonah had seen pictures of the Solari, but the images did not do them justice. They were the galaxy's enigmas, a species that had evolved on a world bathed in high radiation solar winds. Their skin had a faint, pearlescent sheen, like the inside of an oyster shell, and their hair seemed to drift slightly, as if underwater. At the front of the group walked a woman who made the air in the room feel charged with static. She was wearing a structured tunic of dark blue that looked like military dress uniform cut for a gala. Her posture was not just straight, it was absolute. She looked like a weapon that had been sheathed but not disarmed. This was Lyra Voss. Jonah recognized her from the briefing. She was a bonded envoy, one of the rare Solari who facilitated cross-species integration. She stopped at her designated seat. Her eyes, a startling luminous gold, swept the room. When her gaze passed over Jonah's half-hidden head, he felt a strange prickle at the base of his neck, like the drop in pressure before a thunderstorm. "We are ready to begin the calibration," Minister Sorn said. His voice was smooth like oil over glass. "We trust the Solari have brought their famously cooperative spirit." Lyra Voss did not smile. "We brought what was requested, Minister. Let us hope your translation protocols are accurate this time." Jonah winced. That was his department. He ducked back down and tapped a command into his datapad, boosting the gain on the universal translators. The rehearsal began. It was a tedious affair of ceremonial greetings and procedural checks. The Varen master of ceremonies, a nervous little man with trembling hands, began reading a welcome speech that was being translated in real time onto the massive holographic screens floating above the table. Jonah watched the code scroll on his datapad, monitoring the translation matrix. The Varen language was dense, full of contextual shifts. The master of ceremonies cleared his throat. "We welcome the Solari, whose light diminishes our shadows." Jonah frowned. The algorithm was struggling with the Varen word shivra, which could mean diminishes, covers, or erases depending on the inflection. The Solari delegate stiffened. To tell a Solari their light was being diminished was an insult to their biology. Jonah tapped his headset, speaking into the private channel for the tech team. Correction on line 4. The word is enhances, not diminishes. The algorithm is reading the stress pattern wrong. He waited for the correction to appear on the screen. It did not. The system was lagging. Suddenly, a voice cut through the air. It was not the master of ceremonies. He means we make you look better, slick. The silence that followed was absolute. Jonah froze. The voice had come from the Solari side of the table. It was perfect Earth English, but with a slang cadence that sounded like it had been pulled from a gritty spacer bar in the asteroid belt, not a diplomatic summit. Every head turned toward Lyra Voss. She was inspecting her fingernails, looking completely unbothered. "Excuse me?" Minister Sorn said, his voice dropping a full octave. Lyra looked up, her expression one of polite confusion. Was there an issue? The translation matrix seemed to stall. I was merely assisting the human engineer. She gestured vaguely in Jonah's direction without looking at him. His internal logs show the correct translation was enhances. I simply provided a colloquial alternative to speed things up. She had heard him? Jonah stared at her. He was on a closed, encrypted channel. Unless she had ears that could decode military-grade encryption frequencies, that was impossible. Or unless she had hacked the room. Minister Sorn's black eyes narrowed. We prefer standard diplomatic syntax. Envoy Voss. Of course, Lyra said. She leaned back. The picture of innocence. Proceed. The rehearsal continued, but the tension in the room had ratcheted up so high Jonah could practically taste the ozone. He finished his splice work and crawled out from under the table, dusting off his knees. He needed to check the server banks in the back corridor. As he walked past the Solari delegation, he kept his head down. But as he passed Lyra Voss, he faltered. It was a sound. No, not a sound. A feeling. Thump, thump. It was the beat of his own heart, loud in his ears. But underneath it, there was a second rhythm. Thump, thump. Slower, deeper, echoing in his chest cavity like a bass drum played in a room down the hall. He stumbled, catching himself on the back of a chair. He looked at Lyra. She was not looking at him. She was staring straight ahead at Minister Sorn, her profile sharp and cold as cut glass. But the air between them shimmered, just for a second, like heat rising off asphalt. Jonah shook his head, clearing the sensation, and hurried out of the hall. He needed coffee, strong coffee, and maybe a diagnostic scan to make sure the microgravity hadn't given him an arrhythmia. The corridor outside the Grand Hall was lined with statues of Veyran heroes, all looking noble and severe. Jonah found a quiet alcove near the server room and leaned against the wall, checking his datapad. The translation error was fixed, but the lag was still there. Engineer Rios. Jonah jumped. Minister Kale Sorn was standing 10 feet away. The man moved so silently he might as well have been a ghost. Minister, Jonah said, straightening up. I apologize for the glitch earlier. The syntax library for the... I am not interested in the glitch, Sorn said, gliding closer. He smelled of dry spices and something cold, like liquid nitrogen. I am interested in your safety. My safety? Jonah asked. Vera is a complex city, Sorn said. Our customs are intricate. Our politics are volatile. The Solari are a unique species. They have a way of, how to put this, entangling those around them. Jonah frowned. I am just here to fix the comms. Minister. Precisely, Sorn said. And we would hate for a simple engineer to be caught in a diplomatic crossfire. It would be wise to limit your contact with the Solari delegation. Avoid private interactions. Misinterpretation can be fatal here. The threat was wrapped in velvet, but it was unmistakably a threat. I understand, Jonah said, keeping his face neutral. Excellent. Sorn smiled, a thin stretching of pale lips that did not reach his eyes. We value our human partners. Do not make us regret the invitation. Sorn turned and walked away, his gray robes billowing silently behind him. Jonah let out a breath he didn't realize he had been holding. He waited until Sorn turned the corner, then headed for the service corridor that ran behind the embassy walls. He needed to get away from the statues and the silk robes. He needed the comforting hum of machinery. The service corridor was narrow, lit by flickering strip lights. Pipes hissed with steam overhead. It was the digestive tract of the city, hidden away from the glittering atrium. Jonah was halfway down the hall when he heard footsteps behind him. Not the soft glide of Sorn, but the sharp, deliberate click of boot heels. He turned. Lyra Voss was standing there, in the dim light of the service tunnel. Her skin seemed to glow faintly, a soft luminescence that outlined her sharp cheekbones and the curve of her jaw. She had shed the formal jacket she wore at the rehearsal, leaving her in a sleeveless undershirt that revealed arms corded with lean, efficient muscle. Envoy Voss, Jonah said. I thought I was supposed to limit contact. She walked toward him. Her stride was slow, predatory. Minister Sorn worries too much. She stopped 2 feet from him, close enough that the phenomenon returned. The second rhythm. Thump. Thump. It was stronger now, sinking with the beat of his own pulse until his chest felt like a resonant chamber. Did you hack my comms channel? Jonah asked, trying to ignore the way his heart rate was spiking. Lyra tilted her head. Solari hearing is sensitive to electromagnetic frequencies. I did not need to hack it. I just listened to the air. That is impossible, Jonah said. So is a species that chooses humans for partners, Lyra said softly. And yet, here we are. She took a step closer. Jonah stepped back, his back hitting the cold metal of a conduit pipe. Her eyes were bright, burning with an intensity that looked like anger and need twisted together. You humans, she said, her voice dropping to a husky murmur. You always look so terrified when someone flirts with you. Is it a cultural thing or is it just you? Jonah stared at her. His brain was misfiring. Was she flirting? This felt less like flirting and more like being stalked by a large cat. I am not terrified, Jonah stammered. I am confused and I am working. Lyra smirked. It was a terrifyingly attractive expression. You are stuttering. Engineer. I am not. The sound of grinding metal cut him off. Above them, a massive pressure door, a heavy slab of blast-proof steel designed to seal the corridor in case of hull breach, suddenly groaned. The safety locks disengaged with a violent clack. Jonah looked up. The door was dropping, fast. It was falling directly on top of him. He tried to move, but his boot slipped on a patch of condensation. He scrambled, his balance gone. The shadow of the 2-ton door rushed down to crush him. A hand grabbed his collar. It happened in a blur. 1 second, Jonah was staring at his own death. The next, he was flying backward. Lyra had yanked him with strength that should have been impossible for her frame. She slammed her other hand onto the manual override panel on the wall, punching it with enough force to dent the casing. The door slammed into the floor, missing Jonah's boots by 2 inches. The impact shook the deck plates, sending dust raining down from the pipes. Silence returned to the corridor, broken only by the hiss of hydraulic fluid leaking from the door mechanism. Jonah lay on the floor, gasping for air. He looked up. Lyra was standing over him. Her chest was heaving, but not from exertion. Her skin was flashing. Ripples of violet and red light washed over her arms and neck. Her composure, so perfect in the rehearsal hall, had fractured. She reached down, grabbed his shirt with both hands, and hauled him to his feet. Before Jonah could say a word, she slammed him back against the wall. This was not the gentle flirting from a moment ago. This was raw. She pinned him there, her forearm pressed against his chest, her face inches from his. He could feel the heat radiating off her. The world narrowed down to the gold of her eyes and the frantic double-beat rhythm pounding in his ears. "You want to know why my species chooses humans?" she hissed. It was a confession, a threat, and a plea all at once. Jonah couldn't breathe. He couldn't look away. She held him there, her grip tightening on his shirt. She was scanning his face, her eyes darting from his left eye to his right, searching for something. Fear? Dishonesty? Then, she exhaled. The tension in her body did not leave, but it changed. It became controlled. She released him, stepping back but keeping herself between him and the door. "That was not an accident," she said, her voice shaking slightly. Jonah touched his throat, staring at the massive door embedded in the floor. That mechanism is rated for 50 years of continuous operation. It does not just drop. It does when someone overrides the safety protocols remotely, Lyra said. She looked at him, her eyes hard. They are hunting the human near Lyra. Jonah straightened his jacket, his hands trembling. Who? Who is hunting me? And what did you mean? Why does your species choose humans? Lyra looked down the corridor, checking for shadows. "The Solari bond," she said, speaking fast. "It is not poetry. It is not romance propaganda. It is biology. Our nervous systems can synchronize with a compatible partner. It shares reflexes, pain, and truth." She looked back at him. "It acts as a lie detector. Jonah, when I am bonded, I can sense deception in others because my baseline for truth is anchored in my partner. It strengthens willpower. It makes us immune to certain types of manipulation." She took a step toward him again. "That is why they hate it. That is why the Veyron government wants it banned. A bonded Solari cannot be lied to, and a bonded Solari cannot be controlled." Jonah processed this. The warning from Sorn. The accident with the door. "So I am a target because I make you harder to control?" he asked. "You are a target because for some reason, my biology decided to sync with a sarcastic human engineer who bows to cleaning bots," Lyra said. The humor was there, but it was brittle. "And if you leave my side, you are dead. They will manufacture another accident before you reach the airlock." Jonah looked at the door, then back at the alien woman who had just saved his life and then threatened him. "I am not a soldier," he said. "I am a systems engineer. I fix routers. I do not do this." Lyra's expression softened. "Just a fraction. I do not need a soldier. Jonah, I have enough soldiers hunting me. I need someone real." She held out a hand. It was a formal gesture, but her fingers were trembling. "Stay with me until the summit ends. 2 days. I can protect you under diplomatic immunity statutes if you are designated as my associate." "And in return?" Jonah asked. "In return," Lyra said, her eyes flashing gold, "we burn their lies down." Jonah looked at her hand. He thought about the crushing weight of that door. He thought about Sorn's smile. He thought about the second heartbeat thumping in his chest. A rhythm that felt terrifyingly like a second chance. He realized he didn't really have a choice. But looking at Lyra, he realized he didn't want to run away either. He reached out and took her hand. Her skin was warm, and the moment they touched, the second rhythm snapped into perfect phase with his own. "Fine," Jonah said, "but if I get killed, I am haunting you." Lyra pulled him away from the wall, her grip firm. "Deal. Now move." The sensors will show the door drop in 30 seconds. They ran down the corridor together, the systems engineer and the diplomat, leaving the crushed silence behind them. The game had changed. It wasn't about calibration anymore, that it was about survival. The heavy blast doors of the Solari diplomatic suite slid shut with a soft, hermetic hiss that cut off the hum of the embassy corridor. The silence that followed was immediate and profound, the kind of silence that cost a fortune in sound-dampening engineering. Jonah Rios let out a long, ragged breath and leaned against the doorframe, his knees feeling like they were made of cheap gelatin. He watched as Lyra Voss keyed a complex sequence into the locking mechanism, her fingers moving with a blur of speed. "Welcome to sovereign Solari soil," she said without looking back. "You are now technically outside Veyron jurisdiction. If they want to arrest you here, they have to declare war first." Jonah pushed himself off the wall, looking around. The room was not what he expected. He had anticipated the cold, sterile aesthetic of a species that lived in high radiation zones. Instead, the quarters were organic. The furniture seemed to grow out of the floor in smooth, continuous curves of white ceramic and dark wood. But it was the walls that drew his eye. They were alive. The panels lining the room were composed of a translucent gel-like substance that shimmered with a faint, bioluminescent pulse. As Lyra walked past them, the light shifted from a neutral, cool white to a sharp, anxious spike of jagged yellow, tracking her movement like a wave. Jonah took a step forward, trying to regain some semblance of professional dignity. "Look, Envoy Voss," he began, straightening his jacket. "I appreciate the save back there, truly. But I cannot hide in your room for the next 48 hours. I have a job. The communications lattice is still unstable. And if I do not calibrate the..." He stopped. The wall nearest to him had just turned a soft, confused shade of lavender. Lyra turned to face him, tossing her jacket onto a low divan. The walls behind her settled into a steady, rhythmic thrum of deep blue. "You do not have a job anymore. Jonah," she said, "you have a target on your back. And please, stop broadcasting your anxiety to the room. It is giving me a headache." Jonah looked at the wall. It was now pulsing with a rapid, frantic orange beat that perfectly matched his heart rate. The walls. "Red emotions?" he asked, horrified. "They react to bioelectric output and pheromone shifts," Lyra said, walking over to a fabrication unit and pouring 2 glasses of clear, viscous liquid. "It is how we condition ourselves to maintain control. Ambient feedback." She walked back to him, holding out a glass. Jonah took it, his fingers brushing hers. Immediately, the wall directly behind Jonah flushed a deep, undeniable crimson. Jonah snatched his hand back as if he had been burned. He stared at the wall, which was now glowing with the warm, embarrassed hue of a sunset. That is a malfunction," Jonah stammered. "I am just hot. The running, the adrenaline." Lyra took a sip of her drink, watching him over the rim of the glass. Her eyes were amused, the gold irises catching the light. "The walls do not have an algorithm for denial," she said. "Drink. It is electrolytes and a mild sedative. You look like you are about to vibrate through the floor." Jonah drank. The liquid tasted like mint and copper. He walked over to the window, trying to put distance between himself and the traitorous architecture. Outside, the ring city spun slowly against the backdrop of stars, oblivious to the fact that he was currently trapped in a mood ring with an alien diplomat. "Tell me about the bond," Jonah said, keeping his back to her. "You said back in the tunnel that it reveals lies. How?" Lyra moved up beside him. The wall near them blended their colors, his anxious orange and her calm blue, into a swirling violet. "Solari physiology is highly conductive," she explained. "We evolved in an environment where the solar winds stripped away traditional atmosphere. We communicate partly through subtle electromagnetic shifts. Over thousands of years, we developed the ability to sync our nervous systems with others." She paused, looking at his reflection in the glass. "Most species cannot handle it. The Varans, their minds are too rigid, too compartmentalized. If I tried to bond with a Varan, the feedback loop would cause a seizure. But humans..." She turned to face him. "Humans are chaos. Your nervous systems are adaptable, resilient, and messy. You feel everything at once. You lie to yourselves constantly, but your bodies are painfully honest. When you are afraid, you sweat. When you are attracted, your pupils dilate. When you bond with a Solari, that honesty becomes a shared baseline. I can use your raw emotional output to anchor my own perception. It cuts through the noise, it cuts through the manipulation." Jonah frowned, turning to meet her gaze. "So I am a filter," he said flatly. "I am a piece of biological software you plug in to get a clearer signal." Lyra's face hardened. The blue light in the walls darkened to a stormy indigo. "Do not reduce it to mechanics," she said sharply. "It sounds like mechanics to me," Jonah countered, his own voice rising. The wall behind him spiked red again, but this time it was the red of anger. "You pick a human, you sync up, and suddenly you are immune to mind games. That makes me a tool. Lyra, a battery pack for your willpower." Lyra stepped closer, invading his personal space with a sudden fierce intensity. The indigo light flared brighter. "You think this is a convenience?" she asked, her voice low. "You think we enjoy this? My species is dying of politeness. Jonah, we are governed by a coalition that drugs us to keep us docile, that regulates our emotions until we are nothing but perfect, smiling statues, choosing a human, finding someone who can wake us up, who can make us feel something real enough to break the conditioning. That is the only choice my people make freely anymore." She stopped, her chest heaving slightly. The vulnerability in her eyes was terrifying. "It is not about using you," she whispered. "It is about borrowing your freedom so we can remember what it tastes like." Jonah stood frozen. The anger in the room dissipated, replaced by a heavy, charged silence. The walls shifted again, settling into a soft, pulsating gold that seemed to wrap around them both. "I am not a hero," Jonah said quietly. "I fix things. That is all." Lyra looked at him, and for a second, Jonah thought she might touch him. Then, a chime echoed from the door panel. Lyra spun around, the moment shattering. She walked to the entry monitor. "Varan diplomatic courier," she announced, reading the display. She opened the door. A figure stood there, draped in the heavy, ornate robes of a Varan aide, their face obscured by a silver mask. "Compliments of the ministry," the aide said, their voice synthesized and hollow. "A gesture of goodwill for the upcoming gala." The aide held out a small, velvet-lined box. Lyra took it. "Thank you." The aide bowed stiffly and retreated down the corridor. Lyra closed the door and locked it again. She held the box in her palm, staring at it. A peace offering? Jonah asked. Lyra lifted the box to her nose and inhaled deeply. Her eyes narrowed. Metallic ozone, she murmured, and a faint trace of ionizing radiation. She squeezed her hand shut. There was a sharp crunch of plastic and glass. Lyra opened her hand. The remains of a delicate, jewel-encrusted brooch lay in her palm, now crushed into sparkling dust. Amidst the debris was a tiny, flattened microchip, a tracking shard, she said, brushing the dust into a waste disposal unit. High-frequency audio bug. They are not taking chances. She looked at Jonah. Get dressed, engineer. We have a gala to attend. And if anyone asks, you are not my tool. You are my date. And try to look like you are enjoying it. The Varens hate it when we smile. The Gala of the Three Suns was an exercise in excess. The ballroom was a cavernous space at the top of the ring city's central spire, with a domed ceiling that was entirely transparent, offering a panoramic view of the nebula Vera orbited. Waiters drifted through the crowd on anti-gravity discs, offering trays of champagne and synthesized nectar. Holographic banners shimmered in the air, displaying the crests of the attending worlds. Jonah felt entirely out of place in his dress uniform, which he had pulled from the bottom of his kit bag. It smelled faintly of engine oil, though Lyra had assured him it added character. He stuck close to her side as they navigated the room. Lyra was transformed. She wore a gown of liquid silver fabric that moved like mercury over her skin, high-necked and backless, exposing the faint bioluminescent patterns that traced her spine. She moved through the crowd with the lethality of a shark in a koi pond. Around them, the conversation buzzed. Jonah caught snippets of gossip as they passed clusters of Varen elites. Human volatility is a risk to the trade routes. Saw him bowing to a cleaning bot. Can you imagine? Solari looked desperate, clinging to such primitive creatures. Jonah kept his face neutral, but his eyes were working. He was scanning the room, not for social cues, but for patterns. He noticed the security guards first. They were posted at every exit, standing rigid in their ceremonial armor. But their rotation was wrong. Standard protocol dictated a shift change every 45 minutes. These guards had been standing static for an hour, their eyes locked on the crowd and the cameras. Jonah glanced up at the surveillance drones hovering near the ceiling. Two of them were drifting in a tight loop that created a deliberate blind spot near the eastern terrace. Something is wrong, Jonah murmured, leaning in close to Lyra's ear. Lyra smiled radiantly for the benefit of a passing ambassador, but her voice was tight. Be specific. The grid is off, Jonah said. Blind spots in the east sector. Guards are holding position too long. They are setting a perimeter, not patrolling one. Lyra's hand tightened on his arm. Stay close. The happy couple. The voice was like silk dragged over gravel. Jonah turned to see Minister Kale Sorn approaching them. He held a flute of dark purple liquid, his gray robes perfectly motionless despite the air currents in the room. Minister, Lyra said, inclining her head the bare minimum required by protocol. Sorn's black eyes fixed on Jonah. Engineer Rios, you clean up surprisingly well. I trust the Solari quarters were accommodating? Comfortable enough, Jonah said. Though the walls are a bit judgmental, Sorn chuckled, a dry, rattling sound. We do find the Solari preference for emotional display to be quaint, but tonight is a celebration. Let me introduce you to the assembly. Sorn raised a hand, signaling for the room's audio to dampen. The chatter died down. Delegates, Sorn announced, his voice amplified by the room's acoustics. May I present Jonah Rios, the human currently assigned to Envoy Voss. A fine example of the vigorous. species our Solari friends are so fond of. The phrasing was deliberate, assigned to, like he was a piece of luggage. A ripple of polite, mocking laughter moved through the Veyron contingent. Jonah saw the Earth ambassador, a stern woman named Wu, standing near the buffet. She looked ready to intervene, stepping forward with a frown. But before she could move, two Veyron senators stepped into her path, engaging her in sudden, aggressive conversation. They are separating us, Jonah realized. Isolate the target. Sorn turned back to them, lowering his voice. Enjoy the evening, he said. Accidents are so rare at these events. It would be a shame to spoil the mood. He drifted away. I need air, Lyra said abruptly. She pulled Jonah toward the eastern terrace, the one with the camera blind spot. The terrace was a hanging garden, suspended over the abyss of space. Alien flora with translucent petals glowed softly in the starlight. As they walked, the flowers turned their heads toward them, tracking the sound of their voices. Lyra walked to the railing and gripped it, her knuckles white. They are mocking us, she whispered. They parade you around like a pet to shame me, and they threaten you to control me. Jonah stood beside her, looking out at the stars. I have been called worse, he said. Usually by my supervisor when I crash a server. Lyra let out a short, sharp laugh that sounded like a sob. She turned to look at him, the starlight catching the sharp angles of her face. I am terrified. Jonah. The admission hung in the air. I have spent 10 years training to be a diplomat, Lyra said. I can recite trade laws in 12 languages. I can kill a man with a pressure point strike, but I do not know how to stop them from taking my mind. She looked at her hands. If they pass the regulation laws, if they mandate the inhibitors, I will not be me anymore. I will be just another smiling doll. Jonah looked at her. He saw the crack in the armor, the raw terror of a sentient being facing the erasure of her own self. He reached out, moving slowly, giving her time to pull away. He touched her wrist. Her skin was cool, vibrating with a high-tension energy. Lyra froze. She looked down at his hand, then up at his eyes. She looked like someone who had been starving for weeks and had just been offered a feast, but was terrified it was poison. We have rules, she whispered. Solari do not touch unless it is to initiate. To initiate what? Jonah asked. The synchronization, she said. If you touch me now, with emotions this high, the bond will deepen. You will feel what I feel. Jonah didn't pull his hand away. I am not afraid of how you feel. Lyra. Lyra let out a shuddering breath. She broke her own rule. She stepped closer, closing the distance between them until he could feel the heat radiating from her body. You should be, she said. The air between them thickened. The second rhythm, that phantom heartbeat, slammed into Jonah's chest. Thump, thump. It was deafening. He felt a wave of emotion that wasn't his, a jagged, icy spike of fear, followed by a warm, overwhelming rush of gratitude and desire. It was intoxicating. It was terrifying. You are not a tool, Lyra whispered, her hand moving up to grip the lapel of his jacket. I do not want a tool. I want... A scream cut through the night. It came from inside the ballroom. A high, piercing shriek of absolute horror. Lyra and Jonah broke apart instantly. The connection snapped, leaving Jonah reeling, cold and empty. Inside, Lyra commanded. They ran back through the glass doors. The ballroom was in chaos. The crowd had pulled back to the edges of the room, leaving a circle of empty floor near the center. Lying on the obsidian tiles was a Solari aide, one of Lyra's junior staff. He was dead, A jagged wound had been torn through his chest, cauterized instantly by high heat. But it wasn't the wound that drew the eye. It was what was sticking out of it. A distinct, matte black handle, a thermal dagger. Jonah recognized it immediately. It was standard issue for Earth Coalition Heavy World Security. Varen security guards swarmed the circle, weapons drawn. The captain, a towering figure with scar tissue replacing one eye, pointed a gloved finger at Jonah. "Secure the human!" the captain roared. "He is armed and dangerous." The crowd gasped. Ambassador Wu was shouting, trying to push through the line of senators, but she was held back. Jonah stared at the dagger. "That is impossible," he said. "I don't even carry a weapon." "It is a setup," Lyra hissed. She scanned the room. The exits were blocked. The drones were descending, red lasers painting targets on Jonah's chest. "Surrender! Engineer Rios!" the captain shouted, advancing with a stun baton crackling with energy. "You are under arrest for the murder of a diplomatic attaché." Jonah took a step back, his hands raising automatically. He looked at Lyra. Her face was pale, her eyes wide. She was calculating. If they took him now, he would never make it to a cell. He would be killed while escaping. Lyra stepped in front of him. "Stop!" she shouted. Her voice cracked through the room like a whip. The security captain paused. "Step aside, Envoy Voss. This creature is a murderer." "He is not a creature," Lyra said, her voice dropping to a register of deadly calm. "And he is not subject to Varen criminal code." She raised her chin, looking Kale Sorn directly in the eyes across the room. "Jonah Rios is my bonded partner in process." The silence that followed was heavier than the one in the Solari quarters. It was the silence of a bomb having just gone off. A collective gasp went through the Solari delegation. The Varens looked stunned. To claim a human as a partner was controversial. To claim a human during a murder investigation, effectively shielding them with the sacred diplomatic immunity of the Solari bond laws, was political suicide. Sorn's face twisted into a snarl. "You lie, Voss. The bond takes weeks to certify." "The process has begun," Lyra said, her voice steady. "The biological markers are present. If you arrest him, you violate my bodily autonomy. That is an act of war." She reached back and grabbed Jonah's hand. Her grip was iron. "Run," she whispered. Before Jonah could process what was happening, Lyra moved. She didn't run toward the exit. She ran toward the service access panel hidden behind a hologram of the Varen homeworld. She kicked the panel open, revealing a dark, narrow chute. "Go!" she screamed, shoving Jonah inside. He tumbled into the dark, hitting a metal slide. He slid down 20 feet, landing in a pile of insulation foam. Lyra landed beside him a second later, the panel slamming shut above them. She was instantly on her feet, pulling him up. "Maintenance tunnels," she said. "They connect the entire spire. Move." They ran. The tunnels were a maze of pipes and cabling, lit only by emergency strips on the floor. You just claimed me," Jonah panted, struggling to keep up with her. "Do you know what you just did? You destroyed your career. I saved your life." Lyra snapped back. "Turn left here." They scrambled up a spiral staircase that seemed designed for a species with 4 legs. The steps were too far apart and slanted at a 40-degree angle. "Who builds stairs like this?" Jonah yelled, slipping and barking his shin against a riser. "These are murder ladders. This whole station is a death trap." "Stop complaining," Lyra shouted from above him. "I am not complaining. I am critiquing." Jonah grunted, hauling himself up. "And I am bleeding." "Humans always complain when they bleed," Lyra muttered. "It is a design flaw." They burst through a hatch onto a catwalk suspended over the primary ventilation shaft. The wind roared around them, smelling of recycled air and ozone. Lyra stopped, pulling a small device from her pocket. It was a handheld scanner she must have swiped from the dead aide. She looked at the screen, and her face went white. "What?" Jonah asked, leaning over her shoulder. "I scanned the wound before we ran," she said. "The residual energy signature on the dagger. It's Earth tech, right?" Jonah said. "That's why they blamed me." Lyra shook her head. She tapped the screen. "The casing is Earth tech. The thermal emitter? The energy frequency is modulated at 400 terahertz. Jonah froze. 400 terahertz? That is Varen internal security spec. Lyra finished. She looked at him, the wind whipping her silver hair across her face. "A human didn't kill my aide. Jonah. A Varen guard did. And they used a prop to frame you." Jonah looked down into the dark abyss of the ventilation shaft. "So it goes all the way to the top," he said. "Higher," Lyra said grimly. "Sorn isn't just allowing this. He is orchestrating it. He is killing my people to justify killing you." She holstered the scanner and grabbed his hand again. "Come on, engineer. We have a conspiracy to expose. And if we stay here, we are going to get shot by the people who are supposed to be protecting us." They sprinted along the catwalk, two fugitives in the heart of a hostile city, bound together by a lie that was rapidly becoming the only true thing they had left. The maintenance tunnels spat them out into the underside of the ring city, a sector the official map simply labeled as Structural Support Zone 4. The locals called it the Rust Rim. It was a sprawling subterranean labyrinth of repurposed docking bays and pressurized shanties that clung to the station's superstructure like barnacles on a whale. Here, the air tasted less like recycled pine and more like ozone, fried oil, and desperation. Jonah Rios crouched behind a stack of shipping crates, his fingers flying across the holographic interface of his datapad. He was sweating, and not just from the heat radiating off the overhead conduits. "I am routing our IDs through a sanitation subroutine," Jonah said, wiping his brow. "According to the system, you are now a heavy-load transport bot named Unit 734, and I am a crate of frozen cephalopods." Lyra Voss adjusted the collar of the stolen maintenance jacket she had pulled over her gala gown. She looked out at the neon-drenched chaos of the sector, her golden eyes scanning the crowd for threats. "A crate of cephalopods?" she asked, arching an eyebrow. "It was the only manifest with a clearance code for the lower levels," Jonah said, tapping a final command. "And Unit 734 has high-level access because nobody stops the garbage collector." He stood up, the green light of the interface reflecting in his eyes. "We are in. The transit scanners will ignore us for the next hour. After that, the system resets, and we become fugitives again." Lyra nodded, her expression grim. "1 hour is enough. My contact is at the Blind Navigator. It is a skyport bar near the exhaust manifolds." They moved through the crowd. The Rust Rim was a sensory assault. Music that sounded like grinding gears thumped from open doorways. Holographic advertisements for illicit cybernetics flickered and glitched in the smoky air. They passed stalls selling stolen Starship thrusters, counterfeit travel visas, and unrecognizable meats grilling on makeshift heating coils. Jonah kept his head down, but he felt the weight of eyes on them. This was a place where people disappeared for the price of a pair of boots. The Blind Navigator was built into the hollowed-out fuselage of a decommissioned frigate. The air inside was thick with blue smoke and the murmur of a dozen different languages. The patrons were a mix of smugglers, disgraced pilots, and shadow brokers. Lyra led them to a booth in the back, the shadows clinging to her silver dress. She signaled a serving drone. 2 synaptic shunts, she ordered, Jonah blinked. "Shunts, trust me," Lyra said. "You need to blend in. The locals do not drink water." The drone returned with 2 glasses of bubbling, iridescent purple liquid. Jonah picked his up, eyeing it suspiciously. "What is the legal classification of this beverage?" he asked. Lyra took a sip, her eyes never leaving the door. "Mild hallucinogen," she said casually. "It relaxes the inhibition centers. Just sip it. Do not..." Jonah, thirsty from the run and the heat, had already taken a large gulp. He froze. The taste was electric, like licking a battery wrapped in velvet. A warm, fuzzy sensation started at the base of his skull and expanded outward, turning the edges of his vision a soft, pleasant, fuzzy pink. "Lyra?" he said. "Yes?" Lyra was busy scanning the room, watching a group of Varens in the corner. Jonah stared at the table. The wood grain seemed to be flowing like a river. "Your eyes," Jonah said, his voice taking on a dreamy, resonant quality. "They are not merely gold. They are the twin suns of a dying system, burning with the memory of 1,000 forgotten summers." Lyra froze. She turned to look at him slowly. "Excuse me?" Jonah leaned forward, gesturing grandly with his glass. The liquid sloshed dangerously. "We are but dust motes, dancing in the gravity well of an uncaring cosmos," he proclaimed, his voice rising. "And this table is the raft upon which we drift toward the waterfall of destiny." Lyra closed her eyes and pinched the bridge of her nose. "You chugged it," she whispered. "You chugged the shunt." "I did not chug," Jonah said, looking offended. "I imbibed the nectar of truth." Before Lyra could throttle him, a figure slid into the booth across from them. It was a Varen, but short and stout, defying the usual elongated physiology of the species. She wore a chaotic assemblage of data cords woven into her hair, and a pair of spectacles that magnified her eyes to comical proportions. "This is the boyfriend?" the Varen asked, her voice a dry rasp. "He looks poetic." "Pexa," Lyra said, her voice sharp. "We need information, not commentary." Pexa grinned, revealing teeth filed to sharp points. Pexa was an archivist, one of the few Varens who rejected the sterile perfection of the upper city in favor of the messy, lucrative truth of the underground. "Information costs. Envoy," Pexa said. "And I do not take credits. I take secrets, embarrassing ones." Lyra looked at Jonah. Jonah was currently staring at a light fixture with profound sadness. "The light," Jonah whispered. "It struggles so bravely against the dark." Lyra sighed. She leaned across the table. "Minister Kale Sorn dyes his robes," she said quietly. "He is not naturally that pale. He uses a dermal bleach illegal in 3 sectors to achieve the pure caste look." Pexa's eyes widened behind her magnifiers. She cackled, a sound like dry leaves crinkling. "Juicy," she said. "Very juicy. Sorn, the vain tyrant. All right, what do you want to know?" "We found a pattern," Lyra said, sliding a data pad across the table. "The murder of my aide, the tracking shard, the timeline." Pexa tapped the pad with a long, stained fingernail. She scrolled through the data, her grin fading. "You are onto something," she muttered. "I have been watching the archives. Every time there is a vote on trade route deregulation or emergency executive powers, there is a violent incident involving a human." She pulled up a holographic chart. 3 months ago, a human pilot brawls with a guard. 2 days later, the Senate votes to increase security spending by 40%. 6 months ago, a human engineer is accused of sabotage. The Senate approves the Surveillance Act. "It is a rhythm," Jonah said. He had stopped looking at the light. The poetry was still in his voice. But his engineer's brain was fighting through the fog. The chaos is a ladder, and the rungs are made of manufactured fear. Lyra looked at him, impressed despite herself. Exactly, Pexa said. And here is the kicker. I found a hidden ledger in the waste data of the security ministry. Cale Sorn holds controlling shares in the private security firms that get the contracts after every panic. And he owns the orbital prisons where the humans are sent. Jonah's eyes narrowed. He is not just framing us for power, he said. He is farming us for profit. Human arrests explode his revenue stream. We are livestock to him. Pexa nodded. But a ledger is not proof. It is encrypted. To crack it, you need the master key. Where is the key? Lyra asked. Pexa pointed upward, toward the ceiling of the bar. It is on a mag train currently en route to the high sector. The ministry moves its physical data cores every 12 hours to prevent hacking. The train is shielded, armored, and fast. Lyra stood up. Then we need to catch a train. Jonah stood up too, swaying slightly. We shall chase the iron serpent into the belly of the beast, he declared. Lyra grabbed his arm. Just walk, Shakespeare. Try not to recite a sonnet to the security drones. The mag train line ran through the skeletal spine of the ring city. A magnetic rail suspended over a drop that went down forever. The train itself was a silver bullet, moving at 300 miles per hour. They were on the roof. The wind was a physical weight, pressing them against the hull. Jonah's mag boots were locked to the metal skin of the train, the only thing keeping him from being flung into the void. The shunt had worn off, replaced by a cold, sharp terror. This was a bad idea, Jonah shouted over the roar of the wind. Lyra was 10 feet ahead of him, moving in a low crouch. She looked perfectly balanced, her Solari physiology adapting to the shifting gravity vectors as the train spiraled up the ring. The data core is in the rear car, she shouted back. We have to breach the coupling before the security drones detect the weight variance. Too late, Jonah yelled. 3 drones rose from the sides of the train, their red sensors blazing. They looked like angry hornets made of chrome. Jonah scrambled behind a ventilation fin as a laser bolt scorched the metal where his head had been a second ago. He pulled a jammer from his belt, a hasty creation he had cobbled together from parts Lyra bought at the market. He waited for the drone to bank, then threw the device. It magnetized to the lead drone's hull. Jonah hit the activation key. The drone spasmed, its gyroscopes failing. It spun wildly, crashing into the second drone. Both tumbled away into the dark. Nice throw, Lyra called out. She vaulted over a sensor array, drawing a collapsible baton. The third drone swooped at her. Lyra dropped flat, sliding under its firing arc, and swung the baton upward. The impact shattered the drone's sensor eye. She kicked the wreckage off the train and reached the coupling of the rear car. Jonah, the lock is biometric. I need a bypass. Jonah crawled forward, fighting the wind. The train was entering a corkscrew turn. Gravity shifted violently. Up became sideways. Jonah's stomach lurched. He reached the panel, his fingers trembling as he pulled out his toolkit. Hold on, he shouted. He jammed a decoder probe into the port. The screen flashed red, then green. Got it. The hatch hissed open. At that exact moment, the train hit a turbulence pocket. The jolt was massive. Jonah's mag boots held, but his hands slipped from the railing. The sudden shift in inertia whipped his body outward, over the edge of the train. Jonah. He was dangling over nothingness. The city lights were a spinning blur thousands of feet below. His boots were the only anchor, and the magnetic seal was failing under the strain. He looked up. Lyra was there. She didn't reach for his hand. She reached for the harness of his maintenance suit. She grabbed it with both hands, planting her feet against the curvature of the hull. She pulled. It wasn't just strength, it was will. Jonah felt the bond flare, a brilliant, blinding spike of determination that drowned out his own panic. She yanked him back with a savage grunt of effort, hauling him out of the void and slamming him onto the deck of the open hatch. They collapsed together into the darkened cargo hold of the rear car, tangling in a heap of limbs and heavy breathing. The hatch slammed shut above them, sealing out the wind. Jonah lay on his back, staring at the ceiling, his heart hammering against his ribs like a trapped bird. Lyra was on top of him, her breathing ragged, her hands still gripping his harness as if she was afraid gravity would try to take him again. "You," Jonah gasped. "You are very strong." Lyra let out a shaky laugh, resting her forehead against his chest. "And you are very heavy," she whispered. They found shelter in a forgotten maintenance substation deep within the industrial sector. It was a cramped, boxy room filled with humming servers and stacks of spare air filters. It was dusty and smelled of ozone, but it was warm, and it didn't move. Jonah sat on a crate, watching Lyra crack the encryption on the stolen data core. Her hands were steady now, but he could see the tension in the set of her shoulders. The adrenaline from the heist was fading, leaving behind a raw, exposed feeling. The silence in the room felt heavy, charged with everything they hadn't said. Lyra looked up from the core, her eyes meeting his. The gold in her irises was softer now, less like a shield and more like a window. "You did well today, engineer," she said softly. "For a man who fixes routers." Jonah managed a weak smile. "I just wanted to stop being terrified." Lyra turned away, looking at the glowing blue light of the server stack. "Terror is useful," she said. "It keeps you honest." She paused, tracing a finger along the edge of the data core. "You asked me before why my species chooses humans. I told you it was about the bond revealing lies. But that is only half the truth." Jonah waited. The air in the room seemed to vibrate. "My people were not always like this," Lyra said, her voice hollow. "Centuries ago, we were volatile, passionate, violent. We nearly burned our own world down. The coalition, the ruling council that formed from the ashes, decided that emotion was the enemy." She looked back at him. "They genetically regulated us, Jonah. They altered our genome to dampen our adrenal responses, to cap our serotonin and dopamine. They made us calm. They made us polite. They made us incapable of saying no to authority because rebellion requires anger, and we had been engineered to not feel it." Jonah felt a chill that had nothing to do with the room's temperature. That is slavery," he said. "It is peace," Lyra corrected bitterly. "Or so they call it. But the bond breaks the regulation." She stood up and walked toward him. "When I bond with a human, your chemistry floods my system. Your adrenaline becomes my adrenaline. Your anger becomes my anger. It overrides the inhibitors. It gives me back my ability to feel, to fight, to be free." She stopped in front of him. "That is why they hate you. You are the cure to their control." Jonah looked up at her. He saw the pain in her face, the desperation of a woman who had to borrow someone else's heart just to feel her own beat. He stood up, matching her height. "So I am medicine," he said, his voice quiet but hard. "I am a dose of chaos you take to feel normal." Lyra flinched. "No." "Yes," Jonah said, stepping closer. "You need me to fight Sorn. You need me to feel anger. But what happens when the fight is over? Lyra, do you put the medicine back on the shelf?" "Jonah, don't make me your medicine," Jonah said. "I am not a prescription. I am a person." Lyra's face crumpled. The composure she wore like armor shattered completely. "I do not want medicine," she cried out, her voice breaking. She moved so fast he didn't have time to blink. She grabbed his shoulders and pushed him back until he hit the wall of the server bank. It wasn't an attack. Her hands were clutching his shirt, bunching the fabric. She pressed her forehead against his, her breath hitching in her throat. "I do not want a cure," she whispered, her voice shaking. "I want someone who sees me, not the envoy, not the diplomat, me, the terrified, angry, broken thing underneath the regulation." She pulled back slightly, searching his face. "I am falling apart. Jonah, the bond. It is not just chemistry anymore. It is the only time I feel real. And it terrifies me because I do not know where I end and you begin." She paused, her hands trembling on his chest. "May I?" she asked. It was a question of permission, raw and terrified. Jonah looked at her. He felt the bond humming between them, a live wire of shared fear and longing. He felt her desperation, but underneath it, he felt a fierce, protective affection that was entirely hers. She wasn't using him. She was drowning, and he was the only solid ground. "Yes," Jonah breathed, to the closeness, to the bond. "But no," he added firmly, "to being used." "I know," Lyra whispered. She kissed him. It wasn't a movie kiss. It was a collision. It was desperate and messy and tasted of salt and the lingering electric tang of the synaptic shunt. It was the feeling of truth entering the bloodstream. Jonah felt the walls of his own mind dissolve slightly. He felt her relief wash over him like a tidal wave, hot and heavy. He felt the sharp, jagged edges of her fear and the soft, glowing core of her hope. He wrapped his arms around her, pulling her closer, anchoring her. He kissed her back with everything he had, telling her without words that he was there, that he saw her, and that he wasn't going anywhere. When they finally broke apart, they were both gasping. Lyra rested her head on his shoulder, her body shaking. "Okay," Jonah whispered into her hair. "Okay." Lyra took a deep breath, steadying herself. She pulled back, her eyes clear and bright. "We have work to do," she said, her voice stronger now. She turned back to the data core. She plugged it into the console and initiated the decryption sequence using the codes Pexa had given them. The screen filled with cascading text. "Here it is," Lyra said, scanning the files, the financial records, the proof of the prison labor. She stopped. Her blood went cold. "What?" Jonah asked, stepping up beside her. Lyra didn't answer. She pointed at a file named Ghost Directive. She opened it. It was a tactical plan, a detailed schematic for a false flag operation. "They are not just going to frame Earth," Lyra read, her voice horrified. "They are going to trigger an explosion during the final vote tomorrow. A shaped charge in the ventilation system where it will kill half the council." "And who gets the blame?" Jonah asked. "Earth," Lyra said. "Specifically," she scrolled down, her breath hitched. "Specifically, a rogue human engineer corrupted by an unstable Solari bond." Jonah stared at the screen. His name was there, but so was hers. Target, Lyra Voss. The file read, "Status, ideal spark. Use subject's emotional volatility to provoke public incident. Fabricate evidence of Solari human conspiracy to overthrow council. Execute human subject immediately upon confirmation of attack. Detain Solari subject for rehabilitation." Lyra stepped back, her hand over her mouth. "They planned it," she whispered. "All of it. They knew I would pick a human. They knew I would try to fight. They banked on it." She spun away from the console, pacing the small room. "I am not a rebel," she said, her voice rising in panic. "I am a puppet. I walked right into it. I dragged you into it. They want me to be angry. They want me to cause a scene so they can kill you and lock me away forever. She grabbed her hair, pulling at it. I did this. I killed you. I am exactly what they wanted me to be. Jonah grabbed her wrists. Stop, he said. No, Lyra shouted, struggling against his grip. You don't understand. My resistance is part of their script. If we go back, we are just playing our parts. Jonah held her fast. Guilt is how they recruit good people into silence. Lyra! She froze, looking at him. Sorn wants you to feel this, Jonah said, his voice fierce. He wants you to feel like everything you do is a trap. He wants you to despair so you will stop fighting. Because if you stop fighting, he wins without firing a shot. He let go of her wrists and cupped her face. We are not puppets. We are the glitch in their system. They expect us to be predictable. They expect us to run or to fight blindly. So what do we do? Lyra asked, tears standing in her eyes. If we run, they win. If we go back, they kill us. We go back, Jonah said, but we do not follow their script. He looked at the data core. We have the proof. We have the ghost directive. We know exactly where the bomb is and we know exactly when they plan to detonate it. Lyra wiped her eyes. They will arrest us the moment we step foot in the embassy. Then we make sure they can't, Jonah said. We don't walk in as fugitives. We walk in as the only people who can save them. He grinned, a sharp, dangerous expression that he must have picked up from her. We set a counter trap. Sorn wants a show? Let's give him one he can't edit. Lyra looked at him. She took a deep breath, and the second rhythm in the room slowed, steadying into a powerful, synchronized beat. It could cost us our lives, she said. It definitely will if we do nothing, Jonah replied. Lyra nodded. She reached out and took his hand, intertwining their fingers. Then let's go break the summit. The safe house was actually a decommissioned hydroponics bay on level 42. It smelled intensely of fertilizer and damp earth, but it was shielded from the station's internal sensors by 3 feet of lead-lined concrete. Jonah Rios sat at a makeshift workstation constructed from crates, his fingers flying across a holographic keyboard. Across the room, Lyra Voss was pacing, her golden eyes tracking the invisible currents of the room. We are not going to survive this with just the two of us, Jonah said, not looking up from his code. I can spoof the IDs, and you can break the necks. But we need someone to open the doors I cannot hack and someone to patch us up when the breaking happens. Lyra stopped pacing. She looked at the shadows near the rear airlock. You can come out now, Doctor, and you as well, Mrs. Gable. The shadows shifted. 2 figures stepped into the harsh light of the grow lamps. The first was Dr. Eris, a Solari medic Jonah had seen briefly at the gala. He was tall, even for his species, with skin the color of polished obsidian and eyes that burned with a quiet, blue intensity. He carried a field kit that looked like it had seen a dozen war zones. The second figure was Mrs. Gable. Jonah blinked. Mrs. Gable was the Earth Coalition's cultural liaison. She was a woman of perhaps 65, wearing a cardigan that looked hand-knitted and carrying a tote bag that read, Vera Botanical Gardens in cheerful font. She looked like she should be baking cookies, not hiding in a rebel safe house. Mrs. Gable? Jonah asked. Mr. Rios, she said, adjusting her spectacles. You look terrible. Have you been eating? I have been running for my life, Jonah said. Well, you can do both. Mrs. Gable said. She reached into her tote bag and pulled out a heavy-duty data spike wrapped in a floral handkerchief. I brought the decryption keys you asked for, and some sandwiches. You are the contact? Jonah asked. Stunned? Mrs. Gable smiled sweetly. Who do you think taught the ambassador how to bypass the Veyron firewall to stream Earth dramas? I was intelligence before I retired to cultural outreach. Nobody suspects the old woman knitting in the corner. It is a very useful camouflage. Dr. Eris stepped forward, his voice low and melodic. I am here because Lyra called, he said, and because I have treated too many Solari for exhaustion that was actually chemical restraint. If you are going to expose Sorn, I will keep you alive long enough to do it. Jonah nodded, feeling a surge of relief. He turned the screen around. Here is the plan. Sorn is going to rig the summit vote. He has a ghost directive to trigger an explosion and blame us. We need to override the summit's holographic projection system. He tapped the screen. I am building a broadcast worm. It will hijack the projectors and play the contents of the stolen data core, the financial ledgers, the murder evidence, the false flag plans, on a loop, 50 feet tall, in the middle of the Great Hall. Can you bypass the security lattice? Mrs. Gable asked, inspecting the code. It is recursive. I can, Jonah said, but I have to plant the receiver manually, in the power spine of the city. Lyra stiffened. The power spine is lethal, high radiation, zero gravity, and moving conduits. And it is the only place with a hardline connection to the projectors, Jonah said. Lyra looked at him, then at Aris. Then we need to prepare. Jonah, your mind is too loud. If we go into a high-stress combat zone bonded like this, the feedback will incapacitate you. We need to train. The training session took place in the empty water reclamation tank at the back of the bay. It was a large, echoing metal cylinder. Sit, Lyra commanded. Jonah sat cross-legged on the floor. Lyra sat opposite him, her knees touching his. The bond is not just about feeling my emotions, she said. It is about filtering them. You are experiencing sync shock. Your human brain is trying to process Solari input as its own. You need to build a mental levee. She took his hands. Close your eyes. Find your own rhythm, the first heartbeat. Jonah closed his eyes. He felt it immediately, the thumping bass drum of his own heart. But then, the second rhythm intruded, faster, lighter, electric. Focus on your breath. Lyra's voice came from the dark. Solari respiration is a 3-stage cycle. Inhale. Hold the pressure in the diaphragm to oxygenate the blood, then exhale slowly. It calms the sympathetic nervous system. Do it with me. Jonah inhaled. He held it. He felt the pressure building in his chest. Hold it, Lyra said. Let the pressure equalize. Jonah held it. His face felt hot. The second rhythm was getting louder, pounding in his ears. Hold it, Lyra whispered. Jonah's vision sparked with white lights. He felt a sudden, overwhelming wave of Lyra's anxiety. A memory of her standing alone in a cold, white room, being told she was too volatile, and then the room spun. Jonah exhaled sharply and tipped over, hitting the metal floor with a solid thud. Silence. Jonah, Lyra's voice was edged with panic. Jonah groaned, peeling his face off the grating. I saw a white room, he mumbled, and I think I forgot to breathe oxygen. Lyra let out a breath that sounded like a deflating tire. She rolled her eyes, but when she reached out to help him up, her hands were shaking. You passed out, she said, her voice tight. You cannot pass out in the power spine, Jonah. You will float into a turbine. I am fine, Jonah said, sitting up and rubbing his forehead. I just need to get used to the volume. You are very loud. Inside. Lyra looked away. I know. That is why they medicate us. No, Jonah said gently. He reached out and took her hand again. It is not noise. It is just a lot of music at once. Let's try again. They spent the next 4 hours in the tank. It was grueling. The sink shock was real. As they deepened the connection, memories leaked across the bridge. Jonah saw flashes of Lyra's life, the cold sterility of the Solari academies, the shame of being told her emotions were a defect, the crushing loneliness of standing in a room full of people and being unable to speak the truth. And Lyra saw him. She saw the imposter syndrome that plagued him, the feeling that he was just a grease monkey in a universe of diplomats. She felt his fear that he was unlovable because he preferred machines to people. It was invasive. It was raw. But with every shared memory, the panic receded. The bond stopped feeling like a tidal wave and started feeling like a lifeline. By the time they emerged, Jonah felt exhausted but clear. The second rhythm was still there, but it wasn't an intrusion anymore. It was a harmony. A chime from the console interrupted them. Incoming transmission. Mrs. Gable called out. It is on the encrypted diplomatic channel. Who? Lyra asked. Mrs. Gable grimaced. It is the devil himself. Jonah walked to the console and hit accept. Minister Cale Sorn's face materialized in the holographic field. He was sitting in his office, surrounded by floating data streams. He looked calm, almost bored. Engineer Rios, Sorn said smoothly. And Envoy Voss, I see you are still entangled. What do you want? Sorn, Lyra asked, her voice cold. I want to offer a correction to the narrative, Sorn said. He leaned forward. Engineer Rios, you are currently a fugitive, but you do not have to be. Jonah crossed his arms. I am listening. You are a victim, Sorn said. A simple human engineer, seduced and manipulated by a rogue Solari diplomat who used illegal biological bonding techniques to coerce you into acts of terror. Jonah laughed, a dry, sharp sound. That is a creative script. It is a script that ends with you on a shuttle back to Earth, Sorn said, with a full pardon and a generous consultancy fee. All you have to do is surrender. Testify that Lyra Voss forced you to breach the security grid. We will handle the rest. Jonah looked at Lyra. She was standing perfectly still, her face unreadable. She expected him to consider it. It was the logical choice. Jonah looked back at the hologram. And what happens to Lyra? She will be returned to her people for treatment, Sorn said. It is for the best. She is clearly unstable. Jonah stepped closer to the projection. You know, Minister, I have spent my whole life fixing systems. And the thing about a broken system is that it always tries to protect itself by isolating the variable that exposes the flaw. He put his hand on Lyra's shoulder. I am not a victim, and I am not a hero, but I am definitely not a liar. I do not like your script, Sorn, so I am going to rewrite it. Sorn's expression did not change, but his eyes grew colder. Disappointing. I had hoped you possessed survival instincts. He tapped a command on his desk. I have just issued a Priority 1 seizure order for both of you. The charge is no longer murder. It is planetary sabotage. Shoot on sight. You have until the summit begins to make your peace. The hologram flickered and died. Lyra looked at Jonah. You could have gone home. I am home, Jonah said, surprising himself with the truth of it. Now, let's go break into the power spine. The power spine of the Ring City was a vertical shaft 5 miles long, running through the center of the station like a spinal cord. It was a zero-gravity zone filled with massive spinning superconductor rings and crackling energy conduits. Lyra and Jonah floated in the airlock, tethered together by a carbon fiber line. Magnetic boots off, Jonah said over the comms. If we touch the rings with magnets active, the induction will cook us. We have to use thrust packs. Lyra nodded. She looked sleek and dangerous in her pressure suit. Dr. Eris and Mrs. Gable were monitoring from the safe house, guiding them through the sensor blind spots. Opening outer hatch, Jonah said. The airlock cycled. The roar of the station's reactor core filled their helmets. They pushed off, drifting into the cavernous shaft. It was a forest of moving metal, massive rings, 50 feet across, spun in opposite directions, generating the magnetic field that powered the city. Arcs of blue lightning jumped between them. The receiver node is 3 miles down, Jonah said, checking his HUD, past the tertiary turbine. They moved through the chaos. Lyra moved with an elegance that made Jonah jealous. She used her thrusters in short, precise bursts, twisting her body to slip between the spinning blades of the cooling fans. Jonah was less graceful, calculating vectors and firing his thrusters with mathematical precision but zero style. "We are clear," Jonah said. Approaching the node. "Movement at 3 o'clock, Lyra shouted. 3 security drones peeled off from the shadows of a turbine housing. They were combat models, sleek and armed with plasma repeaters. "They saw us!" Jonah yelled. "Fire!" Bolts of superheated plasma streaked through the vacuum. Jonah fired his thruster, spinning behind a conduit. A bolt slammed into the metal inches from his head, showering his visor in sparks. Lyra did not hide. She engaged her thrusters and shot forward, straight at the drones. "Lyra!" Jonah screamed. She pulled a monofilament blade from her belt. In 0G, she was a kinetic missile. She twisted mid-flight, dodging a plasma bolt, and slashed through the sensor eye of the lead drone. She kicked off the wreck, launching herself at the second one. Jonah realized he couldn't just watch. He looked around. He was an engineer. He solved problems. The third drone was locking onto Lyra's back. Jonah spotted a steam release valve on the conduit next to him. He pulled his laser cutter and sliced the valve. A jet of high-pressure steam blasted out into the vacuum, expanding instantly into a cloud of ice crystals. The drone flew straight into the cloud. The sudden temperature drop froze its stabilizers. It spun out of control, crashing into a spinning superconductor ring. The impact vaporized it in a flash of blue light. "Nice shot," Lyra called out, finishing off the second drone. They regrouped at the node. It was a small junction box attached to the central pylon. "Planting the worm," Jonah said, plugging his data pad into the port. He began the upload. The progress bar crawled. 10%, 20. "More contacts," Lyra warned. High above, a squad of Varen guards in armored 0G suits was descending the shaft, firing as they came. "We are pinned," Jonah shouted. "I will hold them," Lyra said. "Keep working." She pushed off the pylon, positioning herself between Jonah and the incoming fire. She deflected a plasma bolt with her blade, a move that shouldn't have been physically possible, and returned fire with a stolen pistol. Jonah watched the upload. 50%. A guard flanked them, coming around the side of the pylon. He raised a rifle, aiming directly at Jonah's exposed back. Jonah didn't see him. Lyra did. She didn't have a shot. She didn't have time to warn him. She fired her thrusters, slamming her body into the path of the bolt. The plasma round hit her in the shoulder. It wasn't a graze. It was a direct impact on the armor plate. The force threw her backward, spinning her into the void. "Lyra." Jonah abandoned the console. He fired his thrusters, chasing her spinning form. He caught her by the tether, yanking her back to the pylon. He grabbed her harness, anchoring them both. Lyra groaned. Her suit was breached. Blood was bubbling up in the 0G, floating in red spheres inside her helmet. "The upload," she gasped. "Finish it." Jonah looked at the screen. 90%. He looked at the guards closing in. He looked at Lyra's pale face. He made a choice. He punched the final command key, ripping the cord out of the port. Done. He grabbed Lyra and fired his main thruster, rocketing them downward, deeper into the shaft, away from the guards and into the steam clouds of the lower reactor. They hid in a maintenance airlock near the base of the spine. Jonah cycled the pressure and ripped his helmet off. He scrambled to Lyra. She was conscious, but her eyes were unfocused. He popped the seals on her suit. The shoulder wound was cauterized but deep. "Dr. Aris!" Jonah shouted into the comms. "I need a triage protocol, now!" He worked frantically, following Aris's voice in his ear, applying biofoam and pressure. Lyra hissed in pain. Her hand shot out, gripping Jonah's wrist. "Leave me," she whispered. "You have to get to the summit. I will slow you down." Jonah stopped. He looked at her. "No! Jonah, be rational," Lyra pleaded. "The mission! To hell with the mission!" Jonah shouted. The sound echoed in the small metal room. He took a breath, his hands shaking as he held the compress against her shoulder. "I am not leaving you. Do you understand? The bond. It goes both ways. If you are in pain, I am in pain. If you die, a part of me goes dark. I am staying." Lyra looked at him. The gold in her eyes swirled. She stopped fighting the pain and started accepting his presence. She let down the wall she had built to protect him from her suffering. The bond snapped into place. Jonah gasped. He felt it, the searing heat in her shoulder. But as he accepted it, as he shared the load, the intensity faded for her. Her breathing slowed. The agony became a dull throb shared between two nervous systems. Manageable because it was divided. "Better?" Jonah asked, wiping sweat from his face. Lyra nodded slowly. "Better." She reached up with her good hand and touched his cheek. "You are reckless. Engineer." "I learned from the best," Jonah said. They sat there for a moment in the silence. "You stayed," Lyra said softly, even when it made no sense. Jonah looked at her. "You said you were afraid of possession. Lyra, you said you didn't want to claim me. But love isn't about claiming. It is about choosing. I am choosing to be here. That is not possession. That is devotion." Lyra's eyes filled with tears. She took a deep, shuddering breath. "I promise you," she whispered, "I will never enter your mind without your consent, and I will never use the bond to push you. I will never take what you do not give." "I know," Jonah said. The comms unit beeped. It was Mrs. Gable. "Jonah, we have a problem. Or rather, a solution that looks like a problem." "What is it?" Jonah asked. "Someone just walked into the safe house." "Mrs. Gable said, it is Pexa." They met Pexa in a sub-level corridor halfway back to the safe house. The Varen archivist looked terrible. Her magnification spectacles were cracked, and she was nervously wringing her hands. "Don't shoot," Pexa squeaked as Lyra raised her pistol. "Give me one reason," Lyra growled. She was leaning heavily on Jonah, but her aim was steady. "You sold us out. That is how Sorn knew about the data core." "I did," Pexa admitted, shrinking back. "Sorn offered me a pension, a villa on the Cloud Sea. I took it. And?" Jonah asked. "And I hate the curtains," Pexa shouted. And I felt bad. Okay? I felt bad. You two, you were poetic. And Sorn is a monster." She fumbled in her tunic and pulled out a data chip. "So I stole this before I left the ministry. It is the final key. The location of Sorn's private vote rigging server. It is not in the cloud. It is physical." "Where?" Lyra asked. "In the sub-basement of the Great Hall," Pexa said. "Directly under the dais." The sub-basement was a cold, sterile tomb of black marble. Jonah bypassed the electronic lock, and the heavy doors swung open. Rows of servers hummed in the dark. But in the center of the room, There was a glass observation tank. Inside the tank were 3 Solari. They were strapped to chairs, connected to tubes that pumped a neon green fluid into their veins. Their eyes were open but blank, devoid of any light. Lyra gasped, stumbling forward. She pressed her hand against the glass. "They are hollow," she whispered. She looked at the monitors next to the tank. Project compliance. The screen read, "Subject status. Inhibitor saturation 100%. Emotional autonomy suppressed. Obedience index absolute." Jonah read the scrolling data. "It is a chemical lobotomy," he said, his voice horrified. "This is what they use on the delegates. This is why the Solari are so polite. They are drugging you into slavery." Lyra began to shake. It wasn't fear. It was rage. Pure, white-hot, volcanic rage. The walls of the room, reactive panels like in her quarters, turned a violent, blinding red. "They did this to us," she hissed. Her voice was distorting, becoming something guttural. "They took our souls and put them in jars." She turned to the servers. She raised her pistol. "I will burn it," she screamed. "I will burn this whole city down. I will kill Sorn. I will kill them all." The bond flooded Jonah with a tidal wave of hatred so intense it nearly brought him to his knees. She was losing control. The ancient, violent Solari nature was breaking through the regulation. Jonah grabbed her arm. "Lyra, let go," she snarled, her eyes glowing with a terrifying light. "They deserve to die, they do," Jonah shouted back. "But if you burn the city, you kill the innocent too." "I don't care. You do care." Jonah stepped in front of her, blocking her line of sight. "Look at me." Lyra stared at him, her chest heaving, the pistol shaking in her hand. "If you let the rage drive," Jonah said, his voice steady and hard, "then Sorn wins. Because he wants you to be a monster. He wants you to prove that Solari are dangerous animals that need to be caged." He reached out and put his hand over the barrel of the gun. "Rage is righteous. Lyra, use it. But do not let it become your only language. If you build a new world on nothing but fire, all you will have left is ash." Lyra looked at him. She looked at the blank-faced Solari in the tank. She looked at the red walls. She let out a scream of frustration, a raw sound of grief. Then she lowered the gun. The red light in the room faded to a simmering, bruised purple. "We do not burn it," she said, her voice trembling. "We expose it. We show everyone what they did." Jonah nodded. He moved to the main console and inserted the drive Pexa had given them. "I am linking this server to the broadcast worm," he said. "When we trigger the signal at the summit, the galaxy won't just see the financial records. They will see this. They will see the tanks." He finished the sequence. "It is done." Lyra wiped her face. She looked exhausted, but the fire in her eyes was cold now. "Controlled. The summit starts in 1 hour," she said. Mrs. Gable's voice crackled in their ears. "Jonah! Lyra! Intelligence intercept. Sorn has moved up the timeline." "What?" Jonah asked. "The false flag attack," Mrs. Gable said. "He isn't waiting for the vote. He is going to detonate the charge in 20 minutes, before the session even opens. He wants to kill the delegates while they are taking their seats." Lyra realized. "Maximum casualties. We have to get up there," Jonah said. "Now." They ran for the turbo lift. They were battered, bleeding, and outnumbered. They were walking into a trap that had just snapped shut. But they had the truth. They had each other. And for the first time in a century, the Solari fire was burning bright and free. The Grand Hall of Convergence was designed to make individual beings feel insignificant. It was a colossal sphere of polished obsidian and transparent aluminum, suspended in the center of the ring city like a spider in a web. Thousands of translation orbs floated near the vaulted ceiling, glowing with the soft, pulsating light of active linguistics, while shimmering banners representing 300 star systems hung motionless in the recycled air. To Jonah Rios, it felt less like a diplomatic venue and more like a cage. The security was suffocating. Varen guards in ceremonial armor stood at every exit, their faces hidden behind featureless silver masks. Drones drifted above the delegates' heads, their sensor eyes glowing a predatory red. The air smelled of expensive perfume and high-voltage anxiety. Jonah and Lyra stood near the rear entrance, hidden in the shadow of a massive pillar. They were battered, their clothes stained with the grease of the maintenance shafts and the dust of the sub-basement. But they had cleaned up enough to pass at a distance. Lyra wore her diplomatic sash over her torn dress like a bandage. Jonah just looked like an engineer who had had a very long shift. "The session is beginning," Lyra whispered, her voice tight. Sorn is taking the dais, far below them, in the center of the amphitheater. Minister Kale Sorn ascended the floating platform. He looked immaculate in his gray robes, a pillar of calm amidst the murmuring sea of delegates. "Distinguished representatives," Sorn's voice boomed, amplified by the acoustics of the sphere. "We gather today under a shadow. Rumors of instability threaten our great coalition, but I promise you, order will be maintained." He raised a hand, as if on cue. The world exploded. A deafening roar tore through the eastern quadrant of the hall. A fireball erupted from a side corridor, blowing the heavy blast doors off their hinges and sending a cloud of debris and smoke billowing into the chamber. Screams erupted from the delegates. The floating banners caught fire, raining burning silk down onto the obsidian floor. Jonah flinched, the heat of the blast washing over his face even at this distance. He didn't wait for the vote. Jonah shouted over the chaos. He triggered it early. Before the smoke had even cleared, Varen security teams were moving. They didn't rush toward the explosion. They rushed toward the exits, sealing the room. A squad of guards marched into the center of the floor, dragging a figure between them. It was a Solari aide, looking dazed and bloodied. "We have a witness," a security captain bellowed, his voice cutting through the panic. The captain shoved the aide toward a floating camera drone. "Speak," the captain commanded. The aide looked up, his eyes glassy and vacant, the telltale sign of chemical compliance. He pointed a trembling finger toward the rear of the hall, toward the exact pillar where Jonah and Lyra were standing. "I saw him," the aide monotone. "The human. Jonah Rios." He planted the device. He claimed it was for Earth's glory. The camera drone whipped around, its lens zooming in on Jonah. A giant holographic projection of his face appeared in the center of the room, grimy and startled. "There he is!" the captain shouted. "Seize the terrorist!" A dozen guards broke formation, sprinting up the aisle toward them. Jonah froze. It was a perfect frame-up. The explosion, the witness, the location. "Run?" Jonah asked, his muscles tensing. "No," Lyra said. She stepped out of the shadows, placing herself directly in front of him. "If we run, we prove them right." She stood tall, her golden eyes burning. As the guards rushed closer, weapons raised, Lyra did not flinch. She raised her hand, palm out. "Halt!" she commanded. Her voice was not loud, but it carried the absolute ringing authority of a creature who had decided to stop being polite. The lead guard slowed, confused by her lack of fear. "Step aside. Envoy Voss," the guard barked. "That human is a fugitive. That human is under the protection of the Solari High Bond," Lyra declared. She ripped the diplomatic sash from her shoulder and held it up. "According to Article 4, Section 9 of the Interstellar Coalition Charter, A bonded partner is an extension of the Solari diplomat's own biological integrity. To seize him without a trial is to seize me. To harm him is to harm a sovereign representative. She stepped closer to the guard, the muzzle of his plasma rifle inches from her chest. Are you prepared to declare war on the Solari Union on live broadcast, Captain? Because that is what you are doing. The captain hesitated. The cameras were watching. The delegates, though panicked, were watching. Zorn's voice drifted down from the dais, smooth and poisonous. Envoy Voss is clearly under duress, Zorn said. The human has compromised her judgment. Secure them both, gently. The guards surged forward again. Now, Lyra hissed to Jonah. Trigger the worm. Jonah tapped the command on his data pad. This was it. The broadcast worm linked to the truth beacon. It should have overridden every screen in the room. He hit execute. Access denied. Jonah stared at the screen. He hit it again. Signal jammed. Carrier wave. Null. He knew, Jonah said, his stomach dropping. Zorn jammed the remote frequencies. The worm is dead. Lyra looked back at him, her eyes widening. Then we have no proof, she whispered. We have the beacon, Jonah said. It is still in the power spine, but I cannot trigger it from here. I have to go to the hardline junction. That is 10 levels down, Lyra said, dodging a grasp from a guard. I can make it, Jonah said, but I need time. You have to keep them busy. Lyra nodded. She grabbed a heavy brass stanchion from the railing and swung it, knocking the lead guard's rifle aside. Go, she screamed. I will hold the floor. Jonah didn't look back. He vaulted over the railing, dropping into the service stairwell just as the plasma fire began to scorch the pillar where he had been standing. The service corridors were a nightmare of flashing red emergency lights and screaming sirens. Jonah ran until his lungs burned. He knew the schematics of the station better than he knew the back of his own hand. He was an engineer, and engineers knew the guts of the machine. He slid down a ladder, ignoring the friction burn on his palms, and sprinted toward the Sector 9 junction. He rounded a corner and skidded to a halt. A blast door blocked the path. It was a sleek, white panel with a single glowing eye in the center. Jonah slammed his hand against the panel. Open. Priority override. The door's AI voice was calm, melodic, and infuriatingly polite. Good afternoon, citizen. We are currently under a level 5 lockdown. Movement is restricted to authorized security personnel. I am authorized, Jonah yelled, hacking at the panel with his multi-tool. I am the Supreme Plumber. Open the door. I am unable to verify that credential. The AI said, please present a biometric key or complete a mood authentication scan to ensure you are not acting under duress. Jonah stared at the eye. Mood authentication? Please state your current emotional violence. The AI requested. Jonah looked behind him. He could hear the heavy boots of a pursuit squad echoing down the hall. My emotional valence? Jonah screamed. I am terrified. I am sweating. People are shooting at me. Distress detected, the AI noted sympathetically. Distress is often a sign of duress. Access denied for your own safety. Please remain calm and wait for a security associate to assist you. Jonah grabbed the panel with both hands. I am not in distress, I am. He remembered the training with Lyra, the breathing, the honesty. He took a deep breath. He looked at the eye. I am angry, Jonah said, his voice shaking. I am furious, and I am about to tear your processor out with my teeth if you do not open this door. The AI paused, processing. Anger is a high-energy state consistent with command-level personnel. Access granted. The door hissed open. Thank you, Jonah screamed, diving through just as a laser bolt singed the air where his head had been. Panic, he yelled back at the door as it closed. Back in the grand hall, Lyra Voss was standing alone in the center of the aisle, surrounded by 20 guards. She had discarded the brass stanchion. She didn't need a weapon. She had a microphone. She had snatched it from the fallen aide and tapped into the room's localized audio. "Is this your order, Minister Sorn?" Her voice rang out, amplified and crystal clear. "To gun down a diplomat because she asks questions you cannot answer?" Sorn stood on the dais, looking down at her like a god inspecting an insect. "I am trying to save you, Lyra," he said, his voice oozing false pity. "You are bonded to a terrorist. Your mind is clouded." "My mind has never been clearer," Lyra retorted. She turned to the delegates, who were cowering behind their desks. "Look at him. He claims my partner is a danger. He claims humans are volatile. But who planted the bomb? Who locked the doors?" She pointed at Sorn. "You fear humans, Minister. But not because they are violent. You fear them because they are the only species in this coalition that you haven't figured out how to break." Sorn's face tightened. The pity vanished, replaced by a cold sneer. "They are primitive," Sorn spat. "They are chaotic. They are free," Lyra shouted. "And that is what terrifies you. You can drug the Solari and you can bribe the Varen, but you cannot program a human to love you. You cannot regulate their loyalty. And because you cannot control them, you want to destroy them." Sorn slammed his hand on the podium. "Enough!" He reached into his robe and pulled out a small silver device, a remote activator. "If you will not submit to reason, envoy, you will submit to biology." He pressed the button. It was the master inhibitor trigger, the same frequency used on the Solari and the tanks. Lyra gasped. Her hands flew to her head. A high-pitched whine tore through her skull. It was a command signal, a digital override screaming at her brain to calm, submit, obey. Her knees buckled. The world turned gray. The rage, the fire, the defiance, it all began to drain away, replaced by a terrifying, hollow silence. She looked up at Sorn. His eyes were triumphant. "Sit down, Lyra," he commanded. Lyra's body began to move on its own. She felt her muscles relaxing, her will dissolving. She was going to sit. She was going to be a good doll. Then, she felt it. Thump, thump. The second rhythm. It came from deep inside her, anchored not in her own biology, but in the bond. It was Jonah's fear, Jonah's exhaustion, and Jonah's stubborn, illogical refusal to give up. The human chaos hit the Varen control signal like a sledgehammer. Lyra's head snapped back. Her eyes, which had gone dull, suddenly flared with a chaotic, strobe-light mixture of gold and violet. She screamed. It wasn't a scream of pain. It was a scream of feedback. The bond amplified the signal and rejected it, broadcasting the interference outward. Every delegate in the front row flinched, clutching their ears. On the massive holographic screens above the dais, the image of Sorn began to glitch, the feed distorted, tearing apart into static. "Look!" a delegate shouted, pointing at Lyra. Her eyes, Lyra stood up, shaking. The veins in her neck were glowing. The mind control tech couldn't handle the dual load of a Solari nervous system synced to a human one. "You cannot." "Silence. Us," Lyra choked out, forcing the words through the static in her brain. Sorn frantically pressed the button again. "Why isn't it working?" "Because I am not alone," Lyra screamed. In the sub-basement junction, Jonah slid the final optical cable into the hardline port. "Connect. Damn it!" The connector clicked into place. The truth beacon came online. Jonah slammed his hand onto the upload key. In the grand hall, the glitching screens went black for a single second. Then, they blazed with white light. The image of Jonah's face vanished. In its place appeared the files from the data core. Huge, scrolling walls of text appeared. Financial transactions showing Soren's payments to the mercenaries. Detailed schematics of the bomb, signed by Soren's private encryption key. And then, the video. The footage from the sub-basement, the tank, the hollowed-out Solari subjects with tubes in their veins. A collective gasp sucked the air out of the room. That is the minister's private lab, a Veyron senator whispered, standing up. I recognize the seal. Soren froze. He looked up at the screens, his face draining of color. Lies! He shouted, his voice cracking. Deep fake fabrications. Then the audio played. It was Soren's voice, recorded from the server logs. The human bond is a contagion. We must purge the Solari of their autonomy before they infect the other species. The false flag attack will provide the necessary pretext for martial law. The silence in the hall was absolute. Then, the shouting started. Traitor! Someone yelled. Murderer! The delegates turned on Soren. The security guards looked at each other, weapons lowering, unsure of their orders. Soren looked around. He saw his control evaporating like mist. He saw Lyra standing in the aisle, breathing hard, looking at him with absolute victory. He made a decision. Kill them, Soren shrieked, pointing at Lyra. Kill the insurgents. They have hacked the system. He drew a weapon from his robes, a sleek, illegal energy pistol, and fired at Lyra. The bolt missed her by inches, scorching the floor. Panic erupted. The delegates stampeded. Soren's loyalist guards, the ones on his private payroll, opened fire on the crowd to create cover. Lockdown. Soren commanded into his wristcom. Seal the hall. Purge the air filtration. Kill everyone. Massive blast shields began to descend over the exits. The air vents hissed shut. Lyra didn't run. She looked toward the rear pillar. Jonah, she yelled. He was there. He burst out of the service stairwell, chest heaving, sweat dripping from his nose. He saw her. She saw him. They ran toward each other in the middle of the war zone. They collided with the force of a car crash. Lyra grabbed his jacket, burying her face in his chest. Jonah wrapped his arms around her, lifting her off her feet for a second. You did it. Lyra sobbed into his neck. You crazy human. You did it. Jonah held her tight. He could feel her heart hammering against his. Or maybe it was his heart hammering against hers. He couldn't tell anymore. I was terrified. He gasped, pressing his forehead against hers. Me too, Lyra said. I am still terrified, Jonah admitted. Soren is shooting at us. Lyra pulled back. She looked at the dais. Soren was retreating behind a wall of loyalist guards, trying to activate the emergency command console. He is trying to initiate emergency rule manually, Lyra said, her eyes hardening. If he enters that code, the station's automated defenses will target every ship in orbit. He will hold the galaxy hostage. We have to stop him, Jonah said. They turned toward the dais. Let's go, Lyra said. They moved as one unit now. The training, the bond, the shared fear. It all crystallized into a singular purpose. They fought their way up the aisle. A guard lunged at Jonah. Lyra swept his legs out from under him. A drone swooped at Lyra. Jonah jammed his datapad into its intake fan, crashing it. They reached the base of the dais. Soren was typing the code. Stop him, Lyra shouted. Suddenly, a figure stepped into their path. It was Ambassador Wu, the Earth representative. Jonah stopped. Ambassador, help us, we have to... Wu raised a heavy stun pistol and pointed it directly at Jonah's chest. Stand down, Mr. Rios, Wu said, her face grim. Jonah blinked, his brain stuttering. What? The trade routes, Wu said, her voice devoid of emotion. Sorn promised Earth exclusive rights to the hyperlanes if we supported the transition. Do you have any idea how many trillions of credits that is worth? Jonah stared at her. He saw Mrs. Gable's face in his mind, offering cookies and hacking codes. He thought of the ideals he believed he was serving. You sold us out, Jonah whispered. For shipping lanes? Stability is expensive. Jonah, Wu said, sometimes you have to buy it with a few scapegoats. She tightened her finger on the trigger. Lyra moved. She didn't attack Wu. She stepped in front of the gun. Move, envoy, Wu warned. My deal is for the human. You are collateral. I am not collateral, Lyra said, her voice ringing with power. And he is not for sale. She looked at Wu with a mixture of pity and contempt. You think you are making a deal with a politician, ambassador. But Sorn is not a politician. He is a butcher. And once he is done with us, do you really think he will keep his word to a species he considers vermin? Wu hesitated. The logic pierced through her greed. In that second of hesitation, Jonah acted. He didn't have a weapon. He had a half-empty bottle of water in his pocket. He threw it. It hit Wu in the face. It wasn't lethal, but it was surprising. Wu flinched. Lyra surged forward, knocking the pistol from her hand with a precise strike to the wrist. She shoved Wu aside, not even bothering to look at her. Go! Lyra yelled. They scrambled up the stairs of the dais. Sorn looked up from the console. His code was 1 digit away from completion. He snarled and aimed his energy pistol at Jonah's head. This ends now! Sorn screamed. Lyra tackled Jonah, knocking him flat. The shot went wide, hitting the holographic projector. Sorn leveled the gun again, but before he could fire, Lyra stood up. She didn't attack. She didn't run. She reached up and tore the silver bonding studs from her ears, the insignia of her rank as a diplomatic envoy. She threw them at Sorn's feet. I renounce my title, she shouted, her voice amplified by the room's acoustics. I renounce the Solari Coalition. I renounce the laws that bind me to silence. The room went still. To renounce title was to become stateless, to become a ghost. I am no longer an envoy, Lyra declared, stepping towards Sorn, her eyes blazing with golden fire. I am Lyra Voss, a free sentient being, and I declare you, Kale Sorn, an enemy of all free species. Sorn laughed, a manic, broken sound. You are nothing, he spat. You are a broken tool bonded to a pet. He backed up toward the main control node. You want freedom? Sorn hissed. Fine. He slammed his hand down on a large red lever on the console. Alarms began to wail. A mechanical voice echoed through the entire city. Purge protocol initiated, citywide atmosphere venting in T-minus 10 minutes. All sectors. Sorn smiled. It was the smile of a man who would rather rule a graveyard than serve in a garden. I have just ordered the life support systems to flush the entire station, Sorn said. Millions will die. The vacuum will take them all. He looked at Lyra, raising his weapon again. Unless you surrender the human to me, right now, give me Jonah Rios, and I will stop the countdown. Jonah stood up. He looked at the massive countdown timer that had appeared on the screens. 09:58. He looked at Sorn. He looked at the terrified delegates. Then he looked at Lyra. She was trembling. The choice was impossible. Her love or the lives of millions. Jonah stepped forward. Lyra grabbed his hand. No, she whispered. Jonah squeezed her fingers. He looked at Sorn. You want me? Jonah asked. Come and get me. He turned to Lyra and whispered one word. Run. But Lyra didn't run. She tightened her grip. We don't run, she said. echoing his words from the tunnel. We fixed the system. She looked at the purge control node behind Sorn. It was an ancient Solari design, stolen and repurposed. Jonah, she said, her voice steady. The node, it reacts to emotional truth. It is the same tech as the core. Jonah understood. We have 10 minutes, he said. Lyra nodded. Let's go to work. The countdown on the overhead screens read 9 minutes and 30 seconds. Jonah Rios and Lyra Voss did not run. They fell. They vaulted over the railing of the dais and slid down the maintenance chutes that led to the city's deepest foundations. The air grew colder the lower they went, shifting from the recycled, sterile scent of the diplomatic levels to the heavy, metallic taste of ozone and ancient dust. This far down, Vera ceased to look like a modern space station. The smooth white panels and glass walkways disappeared, replaced by the dark skeletal architecture of the original builders. The Solari. This is it, Lyra said, her voice echoing strangely in the narrow corridor. The foundation layer, Sorn has barricaded himself in the central control node. Jonah checked his data pad. The screen was glitching, static lines shivering across the display. The radiation down here is spiking, Jonah said. It is messing with the sensors. It is not radiation, Lyra corrected. It is resonance. The Solari built this core to respond to psionic pressure. It is reacting to the panic of 3 million people upstairs. They reached a massive circular door made of a material that looked like frozen smoke. It swirled with dull, gray patterns. There was no keypad, no handle, and no electronic interface for Jonah to hack. It is the gate of reflection, Lyra said, stopping. It blocks anyone whose internal rhythm is dissonant. If we try to force it, it will stop our hearts. Jonah looked at the countdown on his wrist. 8 minutes. So how do we open it? He asked. We have to align, Lyra said. She turned to him, her face pale in the dim light. Not just physically, emotionally. The gate scans for truth. If there is conflict between us, if there is fear we are hiding, it will stay shut. Jonah looked at the door. He felt the hum of it in his teeth. It felt like standing in front of a giant sleeping predator. We don't have time for therapy. Lyra, Jonah said, panic rising in his chest. If we don't make time, everyone dies. Lyra snapped. She grabbed his hands. Look at me. Jonah looked. Her golden eyes were wide, searching his face. What are you afraid of? She asked. Not the bomb. Not Sorn. Us? What are you hiding from me? Jonah tried to pull away, but she held firm. The gray swirls on the door began to turn a violent, agitated red. Jonah! Lyra shouted. Say it! I am afraid you are using me, Jonah yelled, the words tearing out of his throat. The door shuddered. The red light intensified. I am afraid that I am just a drug to you, Jonah continued, his voice cracking. That once the adrenaline fades and the war is over, you will realize I am just a human mechanic and you are a high-born diplomat. I am afraid that you will need me more than you love me. And I am afraid that being needed is not enough. The silence that followed was heavy. The door pulsed, waiting. Lyra looked at him, her expression shattering. She stepped closer, pressing her hand against his chest, right over his heart. You think you are the one who is afraid? She whispered. She looked at the door, then back at him. I am afraid that love is just another chain, she confessed, her voice trembling. My whole life, my emotions have been regulated, controlled, and weaponized. I am afraid that binding myself to you is just trading one master for another. I am afraid that I will hurt you because I do not know how to be gentle. I am afraid that I am a monster who is only pretending to be a person. The door's color shifted. The violent red began to bleed into a soft, pulsating white.
Mano, não sei, mano.
I am not a master.
Mas deve ser 100 ou mais.
Lyra, Jonah said softly.
Só que o cara falou,
I know.
tem que pagar 100. Vou
Lyra
pagar 100
said,
pra quê? Ninguém conhece
but the
porra
fear
nenhuma,
is
não vou
there,
dar 100 pro menor aleatório,
and I am
não
choosing
vou
to
dar
stay anyway.
tá ligado?
She squeezed his hands. I choose you, Jonah. Not because I need a stabilizer. Not because I need a pilot. I choose you because you make me laugh when I want to scream. I choose you because you are the only person who has ever looked at me and seen the woman, not the weapon. Jonah felt the bond between them snap into a new configuration. It wasn't the jagged, desperate connection of the firefight. It was solid. It was a bridge of reinforced steel. I choose you back, Jonah said. I choose the monster and the diplomat and the woman. I choose all of it. The door let out a sound like a singing bowl being struck. The gray swirls vanished, replaced by a blinding, clear transparency. Then, the massive slab of matter dissolved into mist. Run, Lyra said. They sprinted through the mist into the control chamber. It was a cavernous sphere, lined with millions of fiber-optic tendrils that hung from the ceiling like weeping willows made of light. In the center, suspended on a platform of hard light, stood Kale Sorn. He was plugged into the system. Cables ran from his robes into the floor, and his eyes were glowing with the blue light of the data stream. You are late, Sorn's voice boomed, coming from everywhere at once. 6 minutes remaining. He gestured, and the air around them thickened, gravity increasing to crush them. Jonah fell to his knees, gasping. Lyra staggered but remained standing, her Solari physiology fighting the pressure. You cannot stop the purge. Lyra, Sorn said, looking down at them. The logic is absolute. To save the order, the chaos must be excised. He waved a hand, and a holographic screen appeared, showing the panic in the streets of the Ring City. Look at them, Sorn sneered. Animals. They panic. They loot. They kill. They need a shepherd. Lyra took a step forward, fighting the gravity. You are not a shepherd, she spat. You are a butcher. Sorn looked at her with a strange, twisted affection. I could be a partner, he said. He tapped a command, and the gravity around Lyra eased. Join me. Lyra, you have proven yourself strong, stronger than I imagined. You broke the conditioning. That makes you valuable. He walked to the edge of the platform. Give me the human. Let me sacrifice him to appease the mob and justify the lockdown. And in return, I will give you the Solari sector. You can rule your people. You can be their queen. You can protect them from the regulation laws. All you have to do is let this one die. Lyra looked at Jonah. He was on the floor, struggling to breathe. His eyes locked on hers. He didn't speak. He didn't beg. He just waited. It is a simple calculus. Sorn pressed. One life for millions. One human for the freedom of your entire species. It is the logical choice. Lyra looked back at Sorn. She straightened her spine, standing tall in the crushing field. It is the tyrant's choice, she said, her voice clear and cold. She took another step toward the platform. Salvation through domination is not salvation. Sorn, it is just a different kind of cage, and freedom that requires the sacrifice of the innocent is not freedom. It is a bribe. She drew her pistol. I reject your offer. Sorn's face twisted into a mask of fury. Then you will die with him. He slammed his hands onto the console. The cables connected to his spine flared. He wasn't just controlling the station's gravity, he was accessing the Solari sync tech. He directed a concentrated blast of psionic static directly at Jonah. Jonah screamed. It wasn't physical pain. It was his mind being torn open. Sorn was trying to force the bond to shatter, to overwrite Jonah's neural pathways with a command to stop his own heart. No. Lyra shrieked. She didn't shoot. She threw herself between Sorn and Jonah. She didn't block the beam with her body. She blocked it with her mind. She opened the bond wide, pulling Sorn's attack into herself. She stood there, shaking, her nose bleeding, acting as a living shield for Jonah's consciousness. "Jonah, move!" she gasped, her voice sounding like it was coming from underwater. "I can't. Hold him. Forever." Jonah crawled forward. His head was splitting, but Lyra was taking the brunt of it. He scrambled to the secondary access terminal at the base of the platform. He pulled himself up. The screen was locked. Purge protocol, active. T-4 minutes. He couldn't stop it. The code was too deep, protected by layers of encryption he would need weeks to crack. He looked at the venting schematics. The system was designed to open the airlocks and flush the atmosphere into space. He was an engineer. He knew that you couldn't always stop a machine, but you could usually break it. "If I can't stop the flow," Jonah muttered, wiping blood from his eyes, "I will reroute the plumbing." He accessed the output directory. The protocol was set to vent atmosphere. Jonah's fingers flew across the keys. He rewrote the target parameters. Target, atmosphere. Delete, new target, data. He linked the purge command to the central archives. He linked it to Sorn's personal logs. He linked it to the surveillance records of the last 10 years. Then he linked the output to the public broadcast grid. "Sorn!" Jonah yelled. Sorn looked down, distracted from his psychic assault on Lyra. "What are you doing, rodent?" "I am giving you your purge," Jonah said. "But we are not venting the air. We are venting the truth." He hit enter. Truth audit initiated. Above them, the lights in the chamber flickered. Throughout the entire ring city, from the golden spires of the diplomatic quarter to the slums of the Rust Rim, every single screen, billboard, and datapad turned white. The airlocks did not open. The atmosphere remained. Instead, the files poured out. Audio recordings of Sorn ordering assassinations played over the city's PA system. Video footage of him bribing senators played on the sides of skyscrapers. The medical charts of the lobotomized Solari subjects flooded the news feeds. In the control chamber, Sorn staggered back. The cables connected to him were now feeding him the backlash of 1 billion terabytes of data being ripped from the core. "What have you done?" Sorn screamed, clutching his head. "I audited you," Jonah said, collapsing against the console. On the screens surrounding the platform, they could see the reaction. In the grand hall, the Veyron security guards stopped firing. They looked at the screens. They looked at the orders stamped with Sorn's seal, orders to sacrifice their own squads to create political leverage. The revolution did not start with a shout. It started with a lowered rifle. Then, it exploded. The security forces turned on the loyalists. The citizens in the streets, seeing the proof of their manipulation, stormed the government barricades in the control chamber. Sorn watched his empire crumble in real time. He let out a howl of pure animalistic rage. He ripped the interface cables from his robes, sparking with raw energy. He drew his energy sword. He didn't look at Lyra. He looked at Jonah. "You ruined everything," Sorn shrieked, leaping from the platform. He fell upon Jonah like a hawk. Jonah tried to raise his arms, but he was too slow, too exhausted. The blade swung down, humming with lethal heat. There was a flash of silver and blue. Lyra intercepted. She didn't use a weapon. She stepped into the arc of the blade, catching Sorn's wrist with one hand and driving her other palm into his chest. It wasn't a punch. It was a Solari disruption strike. She channeled the entire chaotic, unbridled energy of the bond, her rage, Jonah's fear, their collective will, directly into Sorn's nervous system. Sorn's eyes went wide. His heart stopped. He collapsed backward, the sword clattering to the floor. He lay there, twitching,
Eu ir pra eu
his
ligar
nervous
agora.
system overloaded by the one thing he had tried to erase,
Aqui.
raw, unfiltered emotion. Lyra stood over him, breathing hard.
Tentar te ajudar aqui.
She looked at the console, where the purge protocol was still flashing.
Mano,
Redirected,
a melhor coisa agora é ser
she
eu,
reached
cara,
out
tá
and pulled the
ligado?
master power lever. The hum of the ancient machine died. The lights stabilized. The countdown stopped at 0002. It was over. Lyra sank to her knees. Jonah crawled over to her.
Eu nunca mais te
They
assisto.
sat there on the cold floor of the ancient chamber, surrounded by the silence of the deep earth,
Então,
holding
mano,
on
sabe o
to each
problema?
other as the world above them burned and was born anew. The aftermath was not clean. Revolutions never were. The Veyron government collapsed within 6 hours. An emergency interim council was formed, supervised by a fleet of peacekeepers from 3 neighboring systems. The Solari delegates, freed from the chemical influence, demanded immediate repatriation and the repeal of the regulation laws. 3 days later, Lyra and Jonah stood in a docking bay on the far side of the ring.
Dá pra fazer.
It was quiet here.
Tropa, pega a visão.
The scars of the battle were still visible, scorch marks on the walls,
Brota
a
do
flickering
Zoom.
light
Aí
panel.
mandou vídeo.
But the ships were flying again.
O bagulho,
A Veyron
tá
official,
praia
a
com
nervous
ele.
man from the new council,
Só que,
stood before them holding a data pad.
ó,
The council has reviewed your case, the official said, not making eye contact. Envoy Voss, given your
KM.
instrumental role in exposing the conspiracy, we are prepared to offer you full
Mano, é
reinstatement,
pra lá.
your title, your pension, and a position on the
Ah, não, é
reconstruction
pra
board.
lá o bagulho, viado.
Lyra looked at the official. And Jonah? The official cleared his throat. Mr. Rios is gagun complicated.
Tá, suave, então
Technically,
vamos andando.
he is a hero. But politically, he is a liability. Half the city thinks he is a savior. The other half thinks he is a foreign agitator. The Solari High Command has also requested that he be returned to Earth. They feel a human bond is inappropriate for a high-ranking
Tem risco de ser
diplomat.
assaltado, tropa?
He looked at Jonah. The Earth Coalition has offered you a transport. Mr. Rios, a quiet life, a very generous severance package. But you must leave Vera, and you must sever the
Manda
bond.
no Instagram, mano. Fala
Jonah
no
looked at the
Lava.
transport ship waiting in the
Manda
bay.
aí.
It was
Manda aí no
sleek,
Instagram.
clean,
Ó,
and
você
safe.
consegue pegar aí, manda
It was a
mensagem
ticket
no
back to a
Instagram,
life where he
bagulho
fixed
agora.
routers and
Porque
nobody
eu sei
shot
que
at him.
viado. Tá ligado?
He
Com
looked at
certeza vai ter
Lyra.
um bagulho.
She was wearing a simple flight
A chance
suit,
de eu ser assaltado
her
do
diplomatic
óbvio, vou
finery gone.
nunca sai
She
correndo
looked
pro
tired,
PJ a qualquer lugar
but her
sozinho,
eyes were
óbvio.
clear.
Corre sim.
She was waiting for him to
Caralho,
speak.
pior que eu queria muito estar ali já.
Jonah turned to the official.
Mas foda-se.
You can
Eles
keep
que
the
perderam a
severance
oportunidade, tá
package,
ligado?
Jonah said.
Eles que perderam a oportunidade,
The official
não pelo
blinked.
do Chips.
I beg your pardon? I am not leaving, Jonah said. And I am definitely not severing the bond. The official turned to Lyra. Envoy Voss, surely you understand. If you stay with him, you cannot be an envoy. You will be stateless. You will have no rank, no protection, and many enemies.
Aí é suave,
Lyra
você não conhece
smiled.
RJ?
It was a small, dangerous smile. I already renounced my title. She said,
Mano, meu chinelo tá
I meant
cheio
it.
de areia.
She took Jonah's
Você não tem
hand.
noção.
Tell the High Command that if they want to regulate me, they can come and try. But tell them to bring more than an army, because I have an engineer. The official sighed, shook his head, and walked away. They were alone in the bay. You gave up everything, Jonah said quietly. Your rank, your home. I gave up a cage, Lyra corrected. She turned to him, her expression softening. She reached out and took the lapels of his jacket, backing him up until he hit the wall of the docking bay. It was a familiar position. But this time, there was no threat. There was no desperation. There was only the quiet, steady hum of the bond between them. She pressed her forehead against his. He could feel the warmth of her skin, the steady beat of her heart syncing with his own. Jonah, she whispered. Yeah? You want to know why my species chooses humans? Jonah smiled. He wrapped his arms around her waist, pulling her closer until there was no space left between them. "Because we choose back," he said. Lyra closed her eyes and let out a long, contented breath. Exactly. They stood there for a long moment, the chaos of the galaxy spinning on without them. They had no titles, no home, and 1,000 enemies waiting in the dark. But as they walked hand in hand toward the stolen freighter waiting in the shadows, Jonah Rios knew one thing for certain. He wasn't just fixing the system anymore. He was building a new one. And for the first time in his life, he knew exactly where he belonged.